Hi everybody, welcome back. Today I'm giving you an update on the Ranunculus corms that I started about 2 weeks ago, and I'm happy to report that they are all alive and they've sprouted beautifully. For those who are new, I had 55 Ranunculus corms, 2 different varieties, that I bought for this past planting season but never got around to planting, so they missed an entire season. They've essentially been dormant for the last 18 months. So I wasn't even sure if they were viable and that I would be able to get them to sprout. They did sprout, however, and they're all looking really good. Now, it's been a bit of a crazy week here, and while I filmed pretty much everything, it was a few minutes here and there. It was a bit scattered, and it was pouring with rain in the greenhouse, which made it much too noisy to try to talk through what I was doing while I was planting everything. So that's what I'm going to do right now as I show you all of the footage that I've taken over the last week or so during this process. We haven't really done much in the greenhouse since I cleared out all the tomatoes and peppers, and I had a missing piece of plastic in one of the side openings that I had to replace before I did anything in there over winter. And I just used a little bit of vapor barrier from a local home building store. That's what I had used in these upper triangle shaped openings, this one and the one on the other side. And the one on the other side has held up really well for the last 3 years since we built it. But this side must not have been pulled quite as tight, and it was moving in and out quite a bit with the wind, and it started to rip a little bit and completely disintegrated over the course of this past spring. And it's a really quick job that should have been done months ago, but I just kept putting it off. Once I got that in though, I just needed to arrange some pots so that I could have a bit more room to move around while I was planting in there. So this was all done on the day before I did the actual planting. And I added a bag of manure and the contents of a container that I had planted carrots in way too late in the season. So they didn't have enough time to actually grow into carrots. But the soil in there was still perfectly good. I likely had a bit of organic fertilizer in there. And the tiny little carrots will basically act as a green manure. So I didn't bother removing them. The corms themselves were soaked on January 4th for about 3 hours and then planted into these shallow trays. I have 2 varieties called Rhinette Orange and Rhinette Red. There were 55 corms in total. I mixed up my trays a bit, so I'm not sure which is which, but I know I have 30 of one and 25 of the other. I just barely covered the corms because I wanted to see the shoots as soon as they appeared and get them planted before they developed any significant foliage. So on January 11th, that is 1 week after soaking, I started to see shoots. And this was really exciting because at this point I didn't even know that these were viable. But turns out that they are. And then 3 days later on the 14th, that was the day I decided to plant them out. I would have done it on the 11th when I first started seeing shoots, but I saw warmer temperatures in the forecast over the next couple of days, so I decided to wait. I do have a soil thermometer in there so that I can monitor the soil temperature, which to me, for these corms, is more important than the air temperature in the greenhouse. And the soil temperature's been sitting around 6 degrees Celsius for the last couple of weeks, or 42 Fahrenheit. Now, where the ranunculus has been sprouting in the basement, this was closer to 14 Celsius or 57 Fahrenheit. So I brought them outside and let them sit in the greenhouse for a bit, a couple hours I think, before I planted them, so that they would acclimatize to a lower temperature before I put them in the soil. So this right here, look at that gorgeous root system. This is a good example of why I don't like to grow these on in cell trays before planting it out. That root structure that is developed is really nice, and look how the roots are moving outwards. I don't want to constrict the roots into a cell when they naturally want to move out like this, if I can help it. So this is what they want to do naturally. And if I had been more organized, I would have done this process about 2 months ago in November. I should mention that. I honestly forgot about these corms until a couple of weeks ago. I'm planting these deep because there is a chance that the top layer of soil in here might freeze. And if they're down a good 2 inches, then a light freeze on top of the soil shouldn't hurt them. But I can also put a good couple of more layers of frost cloth on top, so we might be able to prevent that from happening altogether. Here in this part of Nova Scotia, we're a zone 6, and ranunculus are said to be hardy to zone 7 or 8, depending on the source and where you read. If we err on the side of caution and say zone 8, then that means they can theoretically handle a low temperature of negative 12 Celsius or about 10 degrees Fahrenheit. And I really don't expect it to go much below freezing under the frost cloth. So that should give us lots of wiggle room. The greenhouse itself should offer at least one additional zone of protection, and the frost cloth should offer one more, so we should be fine. So this planting consists of 55 corms, and the idea is that they'll come up and bloom first, hopefully along the same time that my tulips are blooming, so I can have them together. And then I'll have a whole other succession that'll start blooming before it gets too hot in here for these ones. So last year I had about 2 weeks after my tulips finished before my ranunculus started blooming, so there was a bit of a gap there. And I'm really hoping that these will bloom early enough to accompany my tulips, or at the very, very least fill in that gap and start to pick up as the tulips are finishing, so that I won't have that break in between flowers. I've also only filled about half of the space in my greenhouse, and I would like to fill the other half of the planting area in here with spring blooming flowers and maybe some herbs. So I have a couple of ideas of what I want to plant in here, but I need to think about that a little bit more before I share that info. So that will be coming up shortly. But that is the ranunculus update for now. So far it seems to be an overwhelming success. It just depends on how it fares over the next 2 months or so when we're going to get our lowest temperatures. That whole process was 12 days, I think, from soaking to planting in the greenhouse, so that didn't take too long at all. And hopefully that will mean that we can extend our ranunculus season by at least a couple of weeks. So that's all for now. Thanks so much for watching, everybody, and I will see you next time.